Hello, welcome to the Sacred Truth channel. It is a great pleasure to have you here with us. Before we begin, I want to make you an important invitation. Follow the channel and turn on the notification bell, because here we don't just talk about religion, we talk about transformation, real faith, spiritual awakening, and truths that many people don't have the courage to say. And while you watch, I also invite you to leave a comment, because your participation strengthens this community and can impact the lives of other people who are going through exactly what you are experiencing right now. Now take a deep breath for a moment and listen to me carefully, because what we are going to talk about today can deeply move you. There is something extremely dangerous that many people carry without realizing it. Something silent. Something that makes no noise, something that does not appear in an obvious way, but that little by little destroys everything from the inside. I'm not talking about something external. I'm not talking about visible problems. I am talking about something internal, spiritual, something that starts small, almost imperceptible, but that, if not treated, grows, becomes stronger, and begins to dominate the way you live, the way you think, and the way you relate to God. I'm talking about weak faith, and maybe right now you think that this does not have much to do with you. Maybe you believe that your faith is fine, that you believe in God, that you pray from time to time, that you maintain a certain spiritual connection. But the question that really matters is not whether you believe. The question is your faith strong enough to sustain you when everything starts to fall apart? Because the truth is that it is very easy to say you have faith when everything is fine. When things are working, when there are no major challenges, when life is calm and within expectations, in those moments anyone can maintain an appearance of faith. Anyone can say they trust God. Anyone can feel spiritually well. But true faith, strong faith, the kind of faith that really makes a difference, only reveals itself when it is tested, when difficulties arise, when problems appear that you cannot control, when unexpected situations happen and take you completely out of your comfort zone. It is in those moments that weak faith begins to appear. Weak faith manifests itself in a subtle way. It does not arrive directly. It does not present itself as something negative at first. It begins with small doubts, with small questions, with thoughts that seem harmless but that accumulate. It is when you start to think, will it work? Is God really listening to me? Is it worth continuing to try? And these thoughts, if not controlled, begin to gain strength. And when they gain strength, they begin to affect your emotions. They begin to generate anxiety, fear, insecurity, and little by little, without you realizing it, your confidence begins to decrease. And when confidence decreases, something very important happens. You begin to depend more on yourself than on God. You start trying to control everything. You start worrying excessively about the future. You start wanting immediate answers. You start losing patience with processes, and this generates enormous exhaustion, because the more you try to control, the more you realize that you cannot, and the more you realize that you cannot, the more your faith weakens, and this cycle repeats itself, intensifies, and leads you into an increasingly heavy emotional state. Another very important point is that weak faith directly affects your perception of reality. When faith is weakened, you begin to see problems as bigger than they really are. You start to see difficulties as impossibilities. You begin to interpret delays as failures, and you begin to feel that you are alone, even when you are not. Weak faith distorts perception, makes you lose clarity, makes you forget everything you have already overcome, everything you have already lived through, all the times God has already been present in your life. And this is extremely dangerous because it disconnects you from your own story. And this disconnection makes you begin to live on autopilot, without depth, without conviction, without direction. Prayer stops being something powerful and becomes something mechanical. Reading the Word stops being something that nourishes and becomes something occasional. The presence of God stops being something constant and becomes something distant. And this does not happen overnight. It happens little by little, in small choices, in small neglects, in small moments when you decide not to seek, not to reflect, not to connect. And the most worrying thing about all this is that the person continues living normally. They continue smiling, continue talking, continue doing their daily activities, but inside there is an emptiness, there is instability, there is a lack of peace that cannot be easily explained. And this lack of peace is one of the biggest signs that something is not right in the spiritual life. Because when faith is strong, there may still be problems. There may still be difficulties. There may still be pain, but there is peace. There is an inner security. There is a confidence that does not depend on circumstances. There is a certainty that, regardless of what is happening, God is in control. And that certainty changes everything. It does not eliminate problems, but it completely changes the way you deal with them. Now, when faith is weak, any problem seems bigger than you. Any situation generates despair. Any delay generates frustration, and this consumes your emotional energy. You begin to feel tired without understanding exactly why. You begin to feel unmotivated. You begin to lose the desire for things that were once important. And this starts to affect all areas of your life, not just the spiritual one. But here is something you need to understand very clearly. Weak faith is not the end. It is a sign, a warning, an invitation to change, because every faith can be strengthened. Every faith can grow. Every faith can become firm again. But this does not happen on its own. It requires a decision. It requires you to stop, reflect, and be honest with yourself. It requires you to recognize that something needs to change. It requires you to decide to seek more, to connect more, to nourish your faith more. And this does not mean doing extraordinary things. It means being consistent in simple things. It means setting aside time for God, even when you don't feel like it. It means praying, even when it seems difficult. It means continuing, even when you do not see immediate results. Because faith is not based on what you feel. It is based on what you decide. And when you begin to live like this, something starts to change. Your mind begins to align. Your emotions begin to balance. Your vision begins to clear. And what once seemed impossible begins to lose strength. You begin to understand that you do not need to have all the answers to keep going. You begin to understand that you do not need to see in order to believe. You begin to understand that trusting is a process, not a momentary feeling. And this change is powerful because it takes you out of a state of instability and leads you into a state of firmness. It takes you out of constant fear and leads you into solid confidence. It takes you out of doubt and leads you into a conviction that does not depend on circumstances. And that is what strong faith does. It sustains you when everything around you tries to bring you down. It keeps you firm when everything seems uncertain. It gives you direction when everything seems confusing. And maybe today is the day you need to make that decision. Maybe you have realized that your faith is not where it should be, and that's okay. What matters is not where you are now. It is what you decide to do from here. You can continue the same way, ignoring, postponing, pretending everything is fine. Or you can start today to strengthen what really matters. And if you choose to strengthen your faith, everything begins to change. Not magically, not instantly, but in a real way, progressive, consistent. And in the end, you will realize something incredible. It was not the circumstances that changed, it was you. And when you change inside, everything around you begins to take on a new meaning. And that is why faith is so powerful. Because it does not just change your life, it changes who you become. And if you want to continue on this journey, don't forget to follow the Sacred Truth channel. Turn on the notification bell and be part of this walk. Because strong faith is not just something you have, it is something you build every single day. And there is something that few people have the courage to admit, but that needs to be said clearly. Weak faith does not destroy a person's life immediately. It destroys it slowly, silently, almost imperceptibly, to the point where the person no longer recognizes who they used to be. It does not happen overnight. It is not something abrupt. It is a progressive wear, a gradual loss of intensity, conviction and spiritual connection. It is like a flame that slowly goes out, not because there was a strong wind, but because it stopped being fed. And when you understand this, you begin to realize that the greatest danger is not in big faults, but in small daily neglects that seem harmless, but over time create a huge distance between you and what was once strong within you. Because the truth is that no one wakes up one day completely distant from God without there having been a process before that. No one loses faith suddenly without there first having been signs, small warnings, moments when something was already not right, but was ignored. And these signs appear in many ways: in the lack of desire to pray, in the difficulty of concentrating spiritually, in the loss of sensitivity to what once touched your heart, in the ease of prioritizing everything except what feeds your faith. These are subtle changes, but extremely significant. And when they are not noticed, they become habits. And those habits begin to shape a new reality, a reality where God no longer occupies the same space as before. And it is exactly here that one of the greatest dangers of weak faith lies. It creates an illusion of normality. The person continues living, continues functioning, continues following the routine, but no longer lives with spiritual depth. There is no longer that constant awareness of God's presence. There is no longer that genuine dependence. There is no longer that sincere pursuit. Everything becomes superficial, automatic, without intensity. And a superficial spiritual life may seem sufficient in calm moments, but it does not sustain anyone when life begins to demand strength. When real challenges arise, when situations appear that require firm and unshakable faith, and when these moments come, and they always come, the person realizes that something is missing. They realize that they do not have the same strength as before, that they do not have the same clarity, that they do not have the same confidence. And this creates a feeling of confusion, because on the outside everything seems the same, but inside there is an emptiness, an insecurity, an instability that cannot be ignored. And often, the person does not understand where this comes from, cannot identify the root of the problem, because they have become so used to this new way of living that they no longer even realize that something has changed. But the root is there, silent, present, acting behind the scenes, weakened faith. And the more time passes, the more this weakness begins to influence important decisions. The person starts to act more based on fear than on confidence, more based on doubt than on conviction, more based on what they see than on what they believe. And this affects choices, paths, opportunities, relationships. Because when faith is not firm, any uncertainty becomes a reason to step back. Any risk becomes a threat. Any difficulty becomes an insurmountable obstacle. And this limits life in a profound way, because it prevents the person from moving forward, prevents them from experiencing new things, prevents them from trusting the process. Weak faith does not only weaken the connection with God, it reduces the reach of life, diminishes courage, blocks growth, And all of this happens so naturally that many people spend years living like this without realizing that they could be living in a completely different way. But there is a turning point, and that point begins when you decide not to accept this condition anymore. When you stop and recognize that something needs to change. When you understand that you do not want to continue living with unstable faith. When you feel that there is something within you that can still be restored, that can still grow, that can still become strong again. And this moment of awareness is extremely powerful, because it is in it that transformation begins. From that moment on, you stop living on autopilot and begin to live intentionally. You begin to pay attention to your choices, your thoughts, your habits. You begin to notice what is feeding your faith and what is weakening it. And this completely changes the dynamics of your life, because you stop being passive and become active in your spiritual growth. And strengthening faith is not complicated, but it requires consistency. It is not about doing big things occasionally. It is about doing small things continuously. It is about creating moments of connection, even when there is no desire. It is about choosing to trust, even when there is no evidence. It is about remaining, even when it would be easier to give up. And these choices, repeated daily, begin to build something solid, something firm, something that is not easily shaken. And over time, you begin to feel the difference. Your mind becomes calmer, your heart becomes lighter, your reactions change. What once generated despair begins to be faced with more calm. What once caused fear begins to be faced with more courage. And not because the problems disappeared, but because your faith became stronger. And when faith becomes stronger, it changes the way you interpret everything. A delay is no longer seen as failure, but as part of the process. A difficulty is no longer seen as an obstacle, but as learning. A moment of silence is no longer seen as God's absence, but as a time of preparation. And this change in perspective is transformative, because it takes you out of a place of reaction and puts you in a place of understanding. And perhaps the most important thing about all this is realizing that strong faith does not eliminate challenges, but completely changes the way you go through those challenges. It gives you stability in the midst of chaos, clarity in the midst of confusion, peace in the midst of pressure. It allows you to continue when everything around you tells you to stop. It sustains you when you feel like you have no strength left. And that is why strengthening faith is not optional. It is essential, because life will test you. At some point, you will face situations that require more than emotional strength, more than logic, more than control. It will require faith. And at that moment, it does not matter what you say you believe. What matters is what you have built within yourself. And if today you realize that your faith needs to be strengthened, this is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of awareness. And awareness is the first step toward change, because from it you can begin to act. You can begin to rebuild. You can begin to nourish what really matters. And maybe this is exactly the moment you needed. Maybe all of this is not by chance. Maybe this message is reaching you because there is something within you that still wants to grow, that still wants to become stronger, that still wants to live a deeper, more real, more solid faith. And if that desire exists, do not ignore it, because it is from it that everything begins. It begins with a decision not to live halfway anymore, a decision not to accept a superficial faith, a decision to seek something deeper, more real, more solid. And when you make that decision, even if the results do not appear immediately, something already begins to change within you. A new mindset begins to form. A new posture begins to arise. A new strength begins to grow. And that strength, over time, turns into firm faith. a faith that does not depend on circumstances, a faith that is not easily shaken, a faith that sustains you in any situation. And in the end, that is what makes all the difference. Because weak faith limits you, but strong faith completely transforms you. And the choice between one and the other begins exactly here, inside you.